So this is my friend Tom. We were talking recently about different experiences that we've had, spiritual experiences, and and he had asked me what was the question.
We got to talking about Matthew Cowley and his great talk on miracles. I listened to it on tape on my mission repeatedly, and we used to play it for our investigators, so I was quite familiar with the talk. And turns out Kevin served a mission in New Zealand, where a lot of these experiences with Matthew Cowley occurred. And so we were talking a little bit about this experience where he had blessed a child to receive his sight. And Kevin actually knew some of the behind the scenes stories. And so Kevin, I said, Kevin, you need to get this down for posterity's sake. And he said he would do it. So that's why we're recording this. And so if you could tell your experience about some people you met in New Zealand that had confirmed some of these experiences that Matthew Cowley had. Can you tell hear what some of what you told me?
Sure. So let me go back a little bit because where this all began, I was 19 years old and I had I'd check out these talk tapes from the LDS Institute down in Thatcher, Arizona, at Eastern Arizona College. And I had a boring job. It was kind of working in this place called the Sugar Shack, and I would scrape up the grease and clean things, and they had these loud speakers, so I'd go punch one of those in and push play, and I could listen to talk tapes. And so I was getting ready for my mission, and so I thought, man, I got to listen to all these talks, I could get up to date on all the different, and it was easy because I didn't have to read it, I could just listen to the stories. Well, one night I checked out this talk tape, and it was called Miracles by Matthew Cowley. And I just punched it in and started playing this talk. And by the time I was done with this talk, and it had several of different talks by Matthew Cowley, not just the one at BYU. But as I was listening to this, the Spirit just really hit me hard.
Strong.
And I was just so touched. I was in tears. I knelt down on the ground. I said, Lord, you haven't called me on a mission yet. I put in my papers. I just want to experience something like that. It was such a marvelous experience. I don't care where you send me in the world, but just give me something like what Matthew Cowley experienced. And lo and behold, I waited a few more months, and I got my mission call, and it was to New Zealand, Auckland mission. And it was the exact place that Matthew Cowley walked, and I met many, many, many people there, and it was just miraculous. And so when I got down there were several experiences that I had, and of course the one you're referring to was just the one about the.
Well, we talked about how he said that he was asked to give a baby a blessing.
Oh yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so in this particular story, Matthew Cowley came in, and the Maori people always procrastinate, take a little longer. They're not too worried about time, and this little baby was supposed to have a blessing, and it was a little bit later, and so they came to Brother Cowley and said, here, Brother Cowley, bless this baby, and. So he said, oh, okay. And so he started to bless the baby. And he stop. Oh, while you're at it, Brother Cowley, give this boy his sight back. He was born blind. And Cowley kind of looked, maybe, and he said, oh, okay. And he said he felt that spirit come through him. And this was he described the spirit in different things. It's just kind of a power that came through him. And he knew it was like faith coming through. These parents had faith that this boy would have his sight back. Blessed this baby with his sight back, left. Many months, many years later, he came back, and he asked, the bishop, kind of wondering how he, whether he got it right or whether it worked, and the bishop said, hey, hoa, Cowley, Brother Cowley, he says, that's the worst thing you could have done is bless that baby with his sight. He's the meanest kid in the neighborhood. And I was telling that story, and my Maori companion that was with me, he goes, "That's my uncle. You know, we ought to go meet him sometime." And you know, so we went and met this.
His uncle
his
was
uncle
had
was
had
the
been
very
that baby
baby.
that was blessed.
That's correct. That had the miracle.
So how'd
So
that
we,
go?
we got there and we talked, and he described how, you know, light came back in, and you know, we were there for, you know, a short time, and he was kind of a rough looking character. You know, he seemed to have, you know, a little more tattoos than normal, that kind of thing. And anyway, he says, you know, I'm not a good guy. I'm not a good guy. Cowley, he was a man of God. He was a true apostle of God. And so, you know, it was touching to see that boy, and how he was still very, very humble about it.
And he honored. He knew from
knew
what his
Cowley.
family had told him
Oh yeah, he
that
knew
the
Cowley.
reason he could see was
That's
because of Matthew
correct.
Cowley's blessing
Right,
from the Lord.
right. And so that was one. Another one was we talked a little bit about up in the northern area. There was a man that was dead.
Oh,
Matthew-
okay. This is the one where a man came in and wanted to have his relative blessed, and they said we can't bless him because he's already
He's
dead.
already dead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so they came and told him that, and he went into the Morai, the meeting house, and he walks in, and there's this dead man, and you know, you can't bless him, he's dead, you know. And they're like, no, he's not supposed to be dead. You need to go bless him. And so he walked in, he went in, and he said, I had faith in his faith, and so I laid my hands on his head, and I felt that feeling come through me again. And that perfect faith, and he says, and then I just blessed him, and I commanded him to arise. And he should have said, you should have seen the Relief Society sisters scatter. So they all got up and ran away, the dead man. And he came to, and he's like, oh, I have a headache. Somebody sent for the elders. You know, I need a blessing. And they're like, you already had a blessing. That's why you're here. And oh, it was like a blanket rolling out. You know, that was coming back to life. And so what's interesting about that is we were traveling, me and my companion were driving, and as we drove by this Morai, there was all these cars parked there, and it didn't look like Maoris or things. It was just kind of different, you know, people walking around, and so we stopped in and went inside, and we said, what's going on? And this is the very Morai where that happened.
Wow.
And it was like an anniversary, like a 100th anniversary or something. And anyway, and so all these people met, and they were telling the story. Descendants of the man that was dead was there.
They happened to be talking about this very event. And
Yeah,
when you
right
pulled
at the very minute. We just happened to be going by right at that time.
Wow.
And it was really interesting. There was a Catholic lady there. And this Catholic lady's telling me the story, and she says, my mother was there. And she goes, you know what? I forgot I have an article. And she went running home, grabbed this newspaper article, and brought it to us and showed us. And it was talking about Mormon apostle and his companion raising this man from the dead. And so there it was in print, newsprint. It was really
Wow.
beautiful. And so I got to experience that, just like the prayer. I wanted to experience the things that Matthew Cowley did.
Wow.
And so they were very powerful experiences.
And then there was another experience. Are you finished with that one?
Yeah.
There was another experience you were telling me about relating to someone you met who had an experience that Matthew Cowley told about in another talk.
Oh, yeah.
You want to explain
Yeah,
about that?
let me explain this one. This is kind of very interesting. I'm just going to read this real quick.
This is from the 1948 conference report?
Yeah, this is actually in conference. Matthew Cowley tells this story. The famous miracle story was given at BYU
Yes.
in, I think, 1953.
Yeah.
so-
And this one, but it was probably on the same tapes you were listening to in,
right.
in
Yeah,
Arizona.
they had a collection.
Okay.
and so we probably listened to. all
And
the
so it's
different
easy to
stories.
confuse them, but this was a 1948 conference report.
Right.
October?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he says, now on one occasion I called in, as I always did when I visited that vicinity, to see this grand little woman, then in her 80s and blind. She did not live in an organized branch, had no contact with the priesthood except as the missionaries visited there. We had no missionaries in those days. They were away at war. I went in and greeted her in the Maori fashion. She was out in the backyard by her little fire. I reached forth my hand to shake hands with her, and I was going to rub noses with her. And she said, "Do not shake hands with me." I said, "Oh, that is clean dirt on your hands. I am willing to shake hands with you." "I am glad to. I want to." She said, "Not yet." Then she got on her hands and knees and crawled over to her little house. At the corner of the house, there was a spade. She lifted up that spade and crawled off in another direction, measuring the distance she went. She finally arrived at a spot and started digging down into the soil with that spade. It finally struck something hard. She took it out of the soil with her hands and lifted out a fruit jar. She opened that fruit jar and reached down in it, took something out and handed it to me, and it turned out to be New Zealand money. In American money, it would have been equivalent to about $100. She said, "There is my tithing. Now I can shake hands with the priesthood of God." I said, "You do not owe that much tithing." She said, "I know it. I do not owe it now, but I am paying some in advance. For I do not know when the priesthood of God will get around this way again." And then I leaned over and pressed my nose and forehead against hers, and the tears from my eyes ran down her cheeks. And that was where the Maoris would press their forehead and their nose together. And he was crying.
And I take it that the reason she didn't know when the priesthood would be around again, this is 1948, so they've been in World War II
Yeah, a lot of
for a number of years.
people were gone, and this was the actual location where this was. The name of the town is Tupuki, and it's kind of way out of the way, and so there just wasn't many people around there.
So what was your subsequent experience?
So let me tell you my experience with that. And this is so phenomenal. So I get there, and in Tupuki, and an older gentleman calls. I think his name was Potiki. I'm not sure, but he calls back and he says, "Hey, I want my grandson, my son. He's gone a little bit wayward from the church and from God, and I want my little grandson to be baptized." And he said, "But I called, and they said that he has to have missionary discussions first. So can you missionaries come and teach him?" So we went to this little small house, and it was kind of up on the hill. Tupuki means the hill, and we were there, and which is where most of the kiwi fruit's grown, by the way.
Really?
And so we were there, and while we were there, he says, we were giving the discussions, and we'd come every week and teach and go through things, and it was kind of getting towards the last part of the missionary discussions. And so we're talking about the 10 Commandments and this, and tithing. And I got to tithing, and I thought, I'm going to tell that story of Matthew Cowley this one year. I thought that's a pretty neat story. And so I'm a storyteller, and so I start telling this story and waving my hands and telling about this woman and how virtuous and wonderful, and how it touched Matthew Cowley's heart enough that it made him cry. It's like the widow's mite. She gave all that she had, even more. I mean, how many people pay tithing in advance? Okay.
Right.
And so when I turned and looked, Brother Potiki was sitting there, and he had tears coming down his cheeks. And he goes, "That's so well told." and he says, "Come, Elder Kraut, come." And he says, before he left, he goes, "See that picture? I want you to see this picture. This is my mother, and this is me. And we're in these pew-pews, the grass skirts.
Okay.
They're standing there." He said, "This is me, and this is my mother." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he says, "Now take note, come." So we go out back, and he walks out back, and he says, "Look." Then he walks over to this little spot, and he picks up a rock, and it had some stuff on it, like in memory of or whatever. Anyway, he picks this rock up, and he pulls out this mayonnaise jar. And he said, "This is my mother's house, where this took place with Brother Cowley."
The very story you had just
right
told.
here. And I mean, tears start coming down my cheeks, because I'm like, I asked God in that prayer, take me somewhere in the world where I can experience like Matthew Cowley did. And here I am, you know, all the way across the world, as far as you can get almost, standing in the very spot where Matthew Cowley had this beautiful experience.
There are no coincidences.
And it was just so incredible. I mean, God brought me in. It was just weird how all of it tied together and everything else. But you know, there's a little bit more to this story. So later, Brother Potiki called and he says, Elder Kraut and your companion is Maori, and he says, you guys come to this marae at this time. My sister has passed away, and I want you to come as an honored guest. And so we go there, and apparently, you know, we're sitting there, and Brother Potiki stands up. My memory can't remember his name.
About what year was this?
83 to 85.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was kind of later, so it was probably 85-ish. And so he's there, and he starts to tell, in the Maori thing at a funeral, you tell the whakapapa, the thing about the ancestry. You know, so you tell a story or something about a famous ancestor or something. So he's telling the story about his mother, and he gets choked up before he even hardly starts. And he's tearing up and he can't talk, and he points at me, you know, the storyteller, come like this, come up here. And I'm looking at my companion, he goes, better go up. And I was okay, I got up there and he tell the story, you know, and so I told the story and I'm dramatizing it, and I'm, you know, and see how great the Maoris were and they did this. Now you're taking on the Pakaha way, you know, the white man way, where it's all about, you know, possessions and money and not giving, and you know, we've got to go back to the old ways. They know the old ways were a very righteous way. And boy, I had all them kind of crying too, you know, and then I got done and I came off the stand and went down afterwards, and there were these preachers there that were Maori, and you know, and this was kind of like a sacred thing, you know, and one of the preachers came up and he says, you know, you're the only white person that's ever given one of these talks at a marae, you know, but Brother Potiki, he's like a chief of chiefs, you know, we didn't dare say anything, and we were all really worried, but he put his hand out and he rubbed noses with me, and he held my shoulder and he says, you did very well, son, you did very well. Thank you for telling that story. You know?
They felt the spirit of it as well.
Yeah, so it turned out really well.
That's great.
And so there I had it. I was right there where it happened.
That's a great testimony. I'm grateful you got it down now,
Yeah.
so that it won't be lost.
We can tell it. There were a few other stories about Matthew Cowley. I ran into people that knew him.
Oh.
And it was really interesting. One of the old men, I went in and talked to him, and I said, tell me about Brother Cowley, you know, your experience with him. He said, you know, my earliest experience, I was a young man, very tall, very big, and I was smoking. And Brother Cowley walked up to me, and he looks me deep into the eyes. He says, he had a look that just penetrated right through your body. And it was like God was looking at me. And he said, he looked at me, and he snatched that cigarette out, and he pounded on the ground, and he smashed that. And he looked at me, and he said, that's the last time you will ever smoke. And it ran right through my body, and I started to shiver and quake. And he said, that was the last time I ever smoked.
Wow.
And that was the power of Matthew Cowley. That's how powerful that man was. So here we have the miracles, and met a lot of people who had those experiences.
An answer to prayer.
Answer to the prayer.
For sure.